y'all. We're about to start the live stream. Good evening, everyone. Good evening to those of you who have joined us here in person at the Fort Worth Botanic Garden, and those of you joining us online from home or wherever you may be via our live stream. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I'm Steve Kaufman. I'm the president and editor of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram and the Star-Telegram's Crossroads Lab. It's a good day in Fort Worth when we have this many people coming out to deal and get involved in the topic that's so important to our community. And it's a good day for our kids when you're doing that as well. So again, thank you so much for your participation, your engagement in this conversation. A couple notes before we get started. One, for those here in person, should you need the restrooms, they're out the doors and down the hall to the right. If during the program you would like to submit a question for possible consideration by the panel, you should have gotten one of these when you came in. There's a QR code. You can scan and submit the question. We'll get to as many of those as we can, but I encourage you to do that. And this event did not happen all by itself. We had a lot of folks come together to make this happen. I encourage you to note the sponsors up on the screen who have done just a fantastic job of all working together to make this happen. So yes, yes. So I'd also like to take a quick moment to talk to you about the Star-Telegram's Crossroads Lab. You may have seen that logo, and some of you may have said, what's that? And I just wanted to give you a little bit of information about that. The Crossroads Lab is a group of 5 full-time reporters that are funded through philanthropic and community partnerships. The lab is designed to fill in gaps in undercovered topics that have developed during the stresses that have been on kind of the traditional model of local journalism in the last 15 years. The lab tackles undercovered topics around education, healthcare, racial equity, economic development, and more. And the lab operates under the nonprofit umbrella of the North Texas Community Foundation. Many of you, I'm sure, are aware of other philanthropic news organizations in town, and those are great. This model has some distinct advantages, and the main one is that its contributions to the Crossroads Lab go exclusively to the reporters and their work, almost exclusively to their work. McClatchy, our parent company, supplies all the background help for that, be it editing firepower and support, be it HR support, IT support, legal support. Everything that comes along is supplied by them. And most importantly, the lab is also to take advantage of the Star-Telegram's well-developed brand and audiences, both in print and online. All of that means there's a far greater chance of impact from the work the lab does. And the lab, which is going on now into its 3rd year, has a great track record of bringing impact in the community and fostering change. So I just wanted to make sure you were aware of that as we move forward. You hopefully picked up one of these Crossroads Lab things when you came in. If you did, there's a little more information about the Crossroads Lab on the back of it. And there's also, again, a QR code should you choose to support the lab. We are very grateful for those in our community who back this kind of reporting that makes a difference on undercovered topics and often relating to underserved populations. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, that's enough of me. We want to get on with the program. And to do that, I'm going to introduce you to our presenter, Dr. David Saenz. David is the Senior Advisor to the Mayor's Council on Education and Workforce Development and Tarrant to and through. He's had a distinguished career in education spanning more than 22 years as a teacher, principal, and administrator, including 10 years in the central office of Fort Worth ISD, where he helped grow career readiness among students, early college programs, a paid teacher residency program, and a partnership with the Texas Wesleyan Leadership Academy Network. Please welcome Dr. David Saenz.
Good evening. Thank you, Steve, for that introduction. It's an honor for me to help open this event. So we are here tonight to explore the question, is reading a civil right? As we stated in the flyer in this event, more than half of 8th grade students who attend public schools in the city of Fort Worth did not meet grade level in the last assessment. Furthermore, data shows that students of color are disproportionately affected by this issue. This gap exacerbates their ability to take advanced courses. It exacerbates inequalities that are present in our education system. It also perpetuates cycles of poverty and marginalization, as these students are less likely to attain the skills needed for well-paying jobs. Addressing this disparity is essential for creating a more inclusive and just educational system. So tonight, We delve into the discussions with experts, educators, and advocates who will share their insights on the importance of literacy in promoting equity, justice, and human dignity. Together, we'll examine the barriers that prevent access to reading and consider these steps that we take to ensure that everyone, regardless of their background, has the opportunity to unlock the power of that written word. When children read proficiently, they are more likely to excel in all subjects from math to science. I was a former science teacher, as reading comprehension is integral to understanding complex concepts. Additionally, being on grade level in reading opens doors to higher education and better career opportunities, breaking those cycles of poverty that we so much want to interrupt. It also fosters critical thinking, creativity, equipping children with the skills needed to navigate and contribute to an increasingly complex world. I am humbled as an educator and inspired to see this auditorium packed with people who care deeply about this issue. Thank you for being here. Our responsibility is not simply to acknowledge a problem, though. Our responsibility is to use all of our capacity, all of our capital, all of our influence in this room to support those working hard every day to ensure each student in our schools can read. And I use each because each of us is different. Sometimes we hide behind the word all, but each of us has our unique differences. However, this is where the words I recently heard from Mayor Matty Parker ring true. This will be hard, but in Fort Worth, we can do hard things. Keyword being we. Before I go on, I want to take a moment to express my heartfelt gratitude to the educators who are already working tirelessly to make a difference. Your dedication, passion, and unwavering commitment to our students are the backbone of our educational system. You are the American heroes who inspire, nurture, and empower that next generation. Thank you for your incredible efforts and for being the change makers in our community. Let's give them a loud round of applause. So the standing question tonight is reading a civil right. Well, it'd be helpful to define what a civil right is. So I did some research. A civil right is legally protected. Didn't have to do much research. I should know this. A civil right is legally protected right or privilege that ensures individuals' freedom and equality under the law. And I'm looking at Kimberly here, and she's already questioning whether this is right or not, so I'm a little worried. These rights are designed to protect individuals from discrimination and to guarantee equal treatment in various aspects of our lives, such as voting, education, employment, and access to public facilities. So once again, I ask, after hearing that, is reading a civil right? Well, it's my pleasure to introduce a distinguished slate of speakers that will delve into this question. So without further ado, let's get started with our keynote speaker. Kimberly Jenkins Robinson is the Martha Lubin Karsh and Bruce A. Karsh Bicentennial Professor of Law and the White Burkett Miller Professor of Law and Public Affairs at the University of Virginia School of Law. She also serves as a professor of both the School of Education and Human Development and the Band School of Leadership and Public Policy. She is one of the nation's leading educational law and policy experts about K through 20 educational equity, school funding, education and democracy, equal opportunity, civil rights, and education federalism. Robinson won the 2023-24 All-University Teaching Award at UVA, which recognizes the most dedicated instructors at the university. In 2023, Robinson launched the Education Rights Institute with a $4.9 million gift from an anonymous donor. Robinson also is a prolific scholar who has published 2 edited books and a diverse array of articles, book chapters, and editorials. She serves as a director of the UVA Law School Center for Study of Race and Law, is a member of the American Law Institute, and a senior research fellow of the Learning Policy Institute. Before Robinson began her career as a professor, she practiced law in the General Counsel's Office of the U.S. Department of Education and as an education litigation attorney with a Washington, D.C. law firm. She also served as clerk for Judge James R. Browning of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit in San Francisco. Robinson graduated cum laude from Harvard Law School and with a BA in Foreign Affairs from the University of Virginia, where she was an Eccles Scholar and recipient of the University Achievement Award. Please help me welcome Kimberly Jenkins Robinson.
So thank you so much to the Fort Worth Star Telegram, to the Sid Richardson Foundation for the invitation to join you all today. I am so excited to see such a packed room. And before I jump into my remarks, I just want to get a sense of who is in the room. So raise your hand if you are the parent of a child in K-12 schools. K-12 schools. All right, so lots of parents in the room. Raise your hand if you work for a school district. Raise your hand if you work for, okay, so there's some educators and district leaders. And then raise your hand if you're one of the many community leaders that's here today, particularly part of the forum. All right, welcome. Well, thank you so much for all of you coming. I'm really excited to talk about literacy as a civil right. And I'm going to talk with you about literacy because literacy provides the key to student engagement in democracy, our economy, and our society. So I chose this illustration for several reasons. So first, when you think about literacy, what you have to understand is that illiteracy, as the Supreme Court has recognized, is an enduring disability. It affects an individual's life every day. So literacy, notice that on this side of the key, there's a lot of darkness, right? Without literacy, you cannot access the various parts of society, whether it's filling out forms to get health care, whether it's applying for a driver's license. There's just so many things that you're set up for. Not even to mention things like understanding a ballot measure, understanding how a candidate's views will affect your own life, right? Being able to support yourself and your family. Education is the key to all of that, which is why you see the light coming through on the other side. When you have literacy, then you can unlock access to those things. So in my remarks, I'm going to talk about several things. So first, I'm just going to begin with the data that Dr. Science first mentioned, which is to acknowledge that in the Fort Worth area, there is certainly data showing that you do not have strong literacy rates. So we're going to talk about that. Then I'm going to just dive into a deeper dive into what does it mean to frame literacy as a civil right? And there are multiple meanings. I'm going to talk about that. Then I'm going to talk some about the legal issues that would surround that issue. And then I'm going to talk about what does this mean for Fort Worth, which I know is what everyone is really focused on. But first, we always have to start with the data and acknowledging why we're here. So when you look at this data, so this is from the Fort Worth Education Partnership, which is thank you for their sponsorship. So if you look at this data, what you see by subject is that you have students in grades 3 through 8. For reading, you have 43% who met grade level standards. So that's if you have a room like this, take it down the middle, almost a little bit to the side, and more than half of those kids are not reading on grade level. Sort of 1, 2, count off, and every other kid can't read on grade level. If you look at some of the other data, math, it's 1 in 3, or only 1 in 3 are reading on grade level. And the science and social studies scores are worse. So there's clearly a crisis happening in the schools in the Fort Worth area. And this is across the city of Fort Worth. This is not just Fort Worth ISD, this is across the city of Fort Worth. So it's important to understand that. And so one of the concerns that we see from this data is that these students lack that ability to become college and career ready and engaged civic participants. They lack that key to access the economy, to be part of democracy, right? To be part of our society, fully functioning members of that. And so one of the reasons why it's important to acknowledge this data at the start of this conversation is because a survey found that 96% of parents in Fort Worth believe that their child is reading on grade level. 96%. Where it's actually 1 in 2. So every other household would say, oh, not on grade level, not on grade level, right? And so there's a disconnect happening in the community right now that I just want to flag from the start. First, you just need to understand that this is a crisis. It's a crisis because a city cannot thrive and survive with individuals who are coming out with this kind of education. This is something that you're going to pay for now, or you're going to pay for later. And it's going to hurt a lot worse if you pay for it later. And I'll talk about that a little bit. All right, so what would it mean to frame education as a civil right? So there are actually multiple definitions of what a civil right is. And I am going to focus specifically on two. And I promise not to get into a whole bunch of legal jargon, because I know whenever I address a broad audience that people are like, oh, the lawyer's speaking, and she's going to talk in a bunch of gibberish that we're not fully, and it's like, no. I try to really keep it straight, because what I really care about are kids and them securing equal educational opportunity. And here's why I care about that, just to give you a little bit of my own story. When I was in third grade, my parents moved us from public schools in one state to public schools in the suburbs of Richmond, Virginia. And they specifically told my brother and I, we are moving you to get you a better education. And why did they tell us that? They wanted us to understand that education was one of the highest values for our family, and that education was the key to unlocking opportunities for us to thrive and succeed. And so it was very important to them for us to obtain better schools, particularly because, one, I was certainly not being particularly challenged in the schools that we were in. And second, my brother was experiencing bullying. Some kids actually followed him home one day, and a group of them got off the bus and were coming toward our house to basically beat him up. So, being the little protective sister that I was, I ran into the house, grabbed a butcher knife, and came out swinging. Basically, like, if you're going to take him down, you're going to have to take both of us down. They, wisely realizing that maybe we have kind of a crazy kid on our hands, they took off running. That definitely triggered conversations in my parents' home that, wow, like, what if those kids had just beaten my brother to a pulp, right? So they ultimately moved us to schools that they thought were safer and more rigorous, and that they set us on a path to that. But I'll tell you that what drives me in this work, what if my parents had not been able to move to another state? What if they had not been willing to leave behind? My father left behind his best friend since he was 2 years old. My mother left behind her sister and nieces and nephews. We left behind our community because they felt that it was important that we get a better education. And I wonder, where would I be if I had stayed? Where would I be if my parents hadn't been able to obtain a better education for me? And why on earth, in one of the wealthiest nations in the world, should anyone have to move from their neighborhood to get a high quality school? Why? This should not be the case. And so I've dedicated myself to advancing and helping to move the idea of equal educational opportunity from a concept to a reality. And so I'll talk about how that's possible. So to return to what a civil right is, civil rights are defined in several ways. First, civil rights help to protect us from discrimination. Unfortunately, our nation has a long history of discrimination. It has discrimination along lines of race, national origin, sex, sexual orientation. There's a wide variety of different types of discrimination that occur in our society, and civil rights help to protect you from that. Second, civil rights also provide affirmative rights to law that protects the capacity of individuals to participate in society and to flourish. So those tend to be what lawyers like to call positive rights. That means you get access to what you need to be part of our society. And literacy is certainly part of that. All right, so why are we talking about rights at all? The important thing to understand about rights is twofold. First, when people think about education as a civil right, or even literacy as a civil right, it has actually got bipartisan support. In other words, both sides of the political aisle use this phrase, education is the civil rights issue of our time. You see President Trump saying that. President Obama has said that. President Biden has said something very similar, right? This is a very common framing for the issue. Why do we do that? Because rights express our highest priorities. Rights frame what we care about, what matters to us. They give vocabulary and communication to those who are seeking a better life for themselves to access society. And so they give you the means to know what to ask for. What are you entitled to, right? What should you be accessing? Rights, particularly legal rights, can act as a constraint on majorities that may not be acting in the interest of the constituents. They give you a way to sort of leverage and change the balance of power when you can enforce rights, right? But they also help you understand how a society should be ordered, what should be provided to each and every individual. All right, so I want to sort of briefly, and so I've talked about the data, and I've talked about what is a civil right and why do rights matter. So now we're going to talk a bit about the legal issue of what does it mean to protect literacy as a civil right? What would that look like? So I'm starting from a place that we're all familiar with, Brown versus Board of Education. So Brown versus Board of Education, we are 70 years from Brown versus Board of Education. And in that case, we all know that they said, look, separate has no place. We cannot have separate schools, right? They're inherently unequal. This is a violation of the 14th Amendment, Equal Protection Clause. And so the court there said we cannot have racially segregated schools, but it also guaranteed something else. It also embraced the concept, the legal concept of equal educational opportunity. They said such an opportunity, the opportunity to get an education where the state has undertaken to provide it, is a right which must be available to all on equal terms. So this is where the concept of equal educational opportunity comes from. It starts as early as Brown, which everyone agrees is like one of our most bedrock cases from the Supreme Court. And so because of the idea of equal educational opportunity, it's important to understand that lawyers then went about to enforce Brown and sought to end school segregation and actually ultimately achieve equal educational opportunity. But here's where the bad news comes in. The bad news is even though we began to get children to learn together, we did not fully secure the full meaning of equal educational opportunity. So what do I mean by that? No, we don't still have legally segregated schools. I'm not saying we've overturned Brown. But what I am saying is we never fully fulfilled the promise of equal educational opportunity that's at the heart of Brown versus Board of Education. And we didn't do that because here's what the lawyers who were litigating the case, like Thurgood Marshall and Robert Carter, these famous lawyers who developed this litigation, their theory of the case was very simple. They said, green follows white. The money goes where the white children are. And so we need to bring these children together, not just so that they can learn from one another, but so that children of color, Black children, could access the quality of educational opportunities that white students were enjoying. So at the time, because we seem to forget this sometimes, but this is only 7 years ago, schools were unequal in so many ways. Funding, facilities, teacher quality, the school day was shorter, the school year was shorter. Multiple grades in schools for children of color were collapsed into one place. And so because of that, they said, look, we need to pursue a full definition of equal educational opportunity, not just getting kids to sit in the same seat together, but to get to equal educational opportunity. Well, as the court eventually began to chip away at school desegregation, there came a pushback against it. And so they were not fully able to get to equal educational opportunity and ensuring that all students have a high quality education. And so eventually lawyers said, okay, then we're going to go back to court. One of the things I love about being a lawyer is that if we can't get it done one way, we will look for another. We will bring a different cause of action. We will pursue it another way. And so this is Demetrio Rodriguez. This is a case actually out of Texas that some of you likely have heard of. And this is him with his sons. He's the plaintiff in a case called San Antonio Independent School Districts versus Rodriguez. He was in the Edgewood School District, and he brought a suit that he took to the highest court in the land. And what he said is, our schools in Edgewood are not getting the funding that nearby schools in Alamo Heights are getting. And this violates the Equal Protection Clause. We are not getting equal educational opportunity, and this violates our 14th Amendment rights. Looking at Brown, you might think, well, the court did say it's a right that should be provided on equal terms. So they thought they had some really good momentum going into the Rodriguez decision. But what happened? The composition of the court changed from the one that was enforcing desegregation. It shifted. And so the court rejected the idea that education was a fundamental right. It said education is not either explicitly protected, so you can read the entire Constitution and you do not find the word education. And they said, nor do we find that it is implicitly protected. So there's no constitutional right to education. So why did the court say this? Why did the court refuse to recognize a right to education? It gave several reasons. It said the plaintiffs assume money matters in education. It matters how much Edgewood gets. It matters how much Alamo Heights get. But there was a debate among the social scientists at the time about whether does money matter? Does money matter? Now, since that case, that has been litigated in more than 25 states, more than 25 cases, and over again, courts have found money matters in education. It matters how much you have in resources to fund schools, because the many things that you need to run a school cost money, whether it's facilities, keeping facilities up to date. COVID really exposed how many schools did not have up-to-date HVAC systems, right? You have to be able to pay high-quality teachers. You have to pay for access to technology. There's so many things that matter. So that debate, fortunately, has been one that has been resolved since the court decided it. The court also said, look, we are justices. It's not our job to decide how Texas should fund its school or any other state. And so we are not the ones who have the expertise or the understanding of the local issues in Texas to decide this issue. They also said that they did not want to upset the federal state balance of authority over education. And so they rejected the Mr. Rodriguez claims and sent him home without a federal constitutional right. Mr. Rodriguez, however, was undeterred by this. He then immediately, once the federal courthouse doors closed, he went into state court and began litigating in Texas state court, which we can, maybe in Q&A, we'll talk a little bit about that. But my point is that there is no federal right to education, but why does that matter? It matters because the absence of a federal right to a high quality education means that you have to have strong state rights to education. You have to guarantee at the state level, and all the states have a right to education, but they vary significantly in the quality of what is guaranteed. So because of that, what we continue to have in our nation is a lack of equal educational opportunity because there aren't consistent guarantees from state to state that say, these disparities in educational opportunity that exist along lines of race and class and geography are not tolerable in our nation. They're unlawful. So because of that, these disparities not only persist, but they just perpetuate generation after generation. So we have significant disparities in educational opportunity gap. And so often what's important to understand about that is, when we get test scores released, everyone focuses on, oh my gosh, these test scores say that we have a problem. Well, it's not that children are unequal. right? It's simply that we have not provided them the educational opportunities that they need to succeed. We do that. We allow and tolerate disparities in what children are given to learn. So you might be thinking at this point, like, okay, so what? All she's told us is that education is not protected by our Constitution. But here's why it matters to Fort Worth. In the Rodriguez case, the court said the plaintiffs, that means the people bringing the suit, the Rodriguez family and other families in Edgewood, did not allege that children had not been given the opportunity to acquire the basic minimum skills necessary for the enjoyment for the rights of speech and full participation in the political process. Notice I said nobody alleged that, and so that issue is not before the court. They merely said these differences in funding amounts do not amount to a constitutional violation. So why does that matter? Remember these test scores? Look at that social studies score. At the far right, I wanted a pointer, but we didn't have one. So 24% of kids are on grade level, grades 3 to 8 for social studies. Reading, less than 1 and 2, right? And so what you see here is data that shows that these students are not gaining exactly what the court said was not alleged in Rodriguez. They're not gaining those basic minimum skills. All right, so where do we go from here? Well, remember how I said lawyers, if we don't win one place, we go somewhere else. Lawyers continue to press this issue, and some of them said, look, these basic minimum skills that weren't alleged in Rodriguez should be recognized as a right. So lawyers went to court for students in Detroit who were experiencing very low quality educational opportunities in a case called Gary B. versus Whitner. And they convinced a federal court to agree that literacy was a federal constitutional right. So this was a case that came out in 2020, and it said, our Constitution guarantees each child a fundamental right to a basic minimum education that enables them to attain the literacy they need to participate in democracy. Why does this matter? And what does this right include? The court explained what this right includes. So one of the things that the plaintiffs, the people who litigated in Detroit explained, was they had facilities that were unacceptable. You can't see it because they're behind the chairs, but this is a picture of like cockroaches in the schools and leaking roofs that were in the schools. There's quite a bit of evidence in the complaint about facilities that were poorly maintained. And so part of what they explain is, this right includes the facilities, teaching, and materials that students need to become literate. You cannot deny students those basic materials. All right, so why a right to literacy? Because of its connection to our democracy. Democracy depends on having educated civic participants. We cannot hold leaders accountable if we don't understand the positions they take in the election, the ballot measures that are before us, right? If we can't ask school board members the tough questions, we can't hold them accountable, then, we don't have a democracy anymore. And so they said it's essential for democracy. All right, so as I mentioned before, so they agreed with the concept that literacy is the key. And they also explained that the basis for this right is actually the due process clause. And what does that mean? What that means is two things. One, education and the importance of education is deeply rooted in our nation's history and traditions. What does that mean? It was imperative when we founded our nation that we have an educated populace to help hold leaders accountable. And it's included in this concept of ordered liberty. What does that mean? That sounds like lawyer jargon to me. I'll tell you what that means. You are not free if you are not literate, period. Ordered liberty means that you have the freedom to exist and operate in society in a way where others can't just fully take advantage of you, right? You are not free without literacy. And so the court reaffirmed that that is the basis for the right. So this decision, ultimately, the case in out of Detroit, the Sixth Circuit case, ultimately, the state who lost, Michigan, was appealing this to a full court of the Sixth Circuit. And before they could fully do that, the lawyers in the case rightly concerned, that the full court would get rid of the decision, toss it out, basically, as they ultimately did. They settled the case. And they settled the case to provide a large settlement that eventually led to $94 million being provided to the Detroit public schools to focus on literacy, as well as significant payments to the plaintiffs themselves and to the Detroit public schools. All right, so what's important to understand from this is that our courts do recognize that illiteracy is an enduring disability. Even our highest court of the land, the Supreme Court, has recognized that. And so there is, within our legal architecture, recognition of the importance of literacy and the harms that occur when people are denied literacy. The court also has recognized the importance of education to help individuals be self-sufficient and to be able to support themselves, right? And I actually believe literacy is so important that every child, each and every child in our nation, should have a federal right to a high quality education. And in this book that I edited, I talk about what that would look like. Why should we think about each and every child in our nation, one of the wealthiest nations in the world, being guaranteed a right to a high quality education? How would we do that? You don't have to have the Supreme Court agree with you. You can actually get Congress to pass legislation, right? And then what should that guarantee? One of the theories that is put forth in the book, it's a collection of scholars across the country who are writing about this issue, is a right to a high quality education that provides you, that helps students to be college and career ready and engaged civic participants. So this is one of the reasons why I launched the Education Rights Institute, to help fuel the conversation about the fact that our children lack a right to a high quality education, because state rights to education too often don't guarantee the high quality education that our children need. In addition, we founded the right to help people understand that because we have never in our nation made equal educational opportunity a reality for our students, we have broad educational opportunity gaps that we perpetuate year after year, but we can close them. And so we provide research reports and videos that are 2 minutes or less that explain these issues and what reforms are working. So that is some of the work that we do at the Institute. So why does all of this matter to Fort Worth? Why does this matter? It matters to Fort Worth because this is not just about any individual student, right? I know there are a number of parents in the room, and I'm sure there are parents who are watching who couldn't get away from their kids to come tonight, right? This is not just about the success, frankly, of my kids or any one child represented by a parent in this room. It's a recognition that when so many children cannot read, this has an effect not only on those children, but collectively as a community, you cannot survive and thrive when you do not have children that are graduating from high school that are literate. So some of the things that it contributes to are higher dropout and incarceration rates. So I heard today from one of the many meetings that I did, 77% of inmates in Texas prison are functionally illiterate. Functionally illiterate. What does that mean for Fort Worth? Where do you think all these kids are What's going to happen here, right? You're setting yourself up for a crisis, right? You get poor health outcomes, less engagement in the civic process, right? Greater homelessness. You get all of these things because you're not choosing to adopt an approach that would ensure the literacy of children. And when I say literacy, I do mean not just reading, although I know the topic for tonight was reading as a fundamental right. So I'm talking about reading fluency. But I also include within that umbrella of literacy, which is why I pivoted from reading to literacy, numerical fluency, numerical literacy. You can't, if you don't have, some fundamental math skills, when you go get change at a store, you don't know if they're giving you the right change. I've had clerks try to check me out of a store, and they're like, I'm not sure how to calculate your change. Right? And I don't mean here, this is actually back home. But my point is, this is a young person who was not able to subtract, the change that I needed when I was checking out of a store because the cash register wasn't working properly. And she just had to do it in her head. And she couldn't do it. She couldn't subtract it. And it just kind of broke my heart. Because numerical fluency training in that would allow that to happen. And so one of the things to think about when you think about literacy as a civil right, there are many ways that rights operate, as I explained at the beginning. Rights in the technical legal sense and the most robust legal sense are something that you can then take to court and enforce, right? But that is not all that rights are, because guess what? Once you even win in court, really what has to happen is the implementation to make it a reality. You don't have to have a court decision to make that happen. You can choose as a city, as a community, to say, Fort Worth, the place where education and literacy is a civil right. And you can make that a reality. And you can do that by ensuring that you have a high quality curriculum for literacy in your schools. You have to make sure that parents understand, starting at the earliest ages, like pre-K, kindergarten, are kids on grade level. They have to understand that those A's and B's that you're seeing when you get home, those don't mean anything if your kid is not on grade level. So you have to understand that, right? And so if Fort Worth is ready to make education a civil right, then you embrace literacy as your highest priority. And then you drive the resources, policies, information, parent meetings, all of that around that focus. And you build a better Fort Worth. And that is how you make the dream of equal educational opportunity a reality for your students. Thank you. So I can leave the data. Yeah, we can leave it up there.
I think that's why we're here. Let's give her another round of applause. Wow. Brant, I'm also expecting college credit from this too, so because that was great. I would definitely take your classes. So as I said earlier, we can do hard things in Fort Worth, and this is what we're here to discuss. The folks I get to invite here tonight, I deeply respect. They're leading a wonderful and diverse city. They're supporting initiatives that support and work towards some of the things we need to do, or they're engaging with our parents at the grassroots level, where they're at, as is said on your website, so that we can support our families and make sure that they get what they need in their schools. So I get to introduce the panel today. First up, Brant Beasley is the founding CEO and Fort Worth of the Fort Worth Education Partnership. A native of Dallas, Texas, Brant attended Baylor University, earning a bachelor's degree in religion and philosophy. He went on to earn a Master of Divinity in Theology from Baylor George W. Truett Theological Seminary, graduating magna cum laude, as well as earning a Doctor of Ministry degree from Princeton Theological Seminary. He served as the senior pastor of Broadway Baptist Church in Fort Worth for 7 years. In 2016, Brant began working with several foundations in Fort Worth to achieve the goal that children have access to a high-quality public education. This work led to the founding of the Fort Worth Education Partnership in 2019. Brent completed his public leadership credential from Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government in 2024. Let's welcome Brent Beasley. Our next panelist, Trinace Dorsey Hollins, is a dedicated wife, mother of 2 girls, and a proud 5th-generation resident of Fort Worth. Her deep-rooted connection to the community and her experiences as a product of public schools has shaped her unwavering commitment to educational justice. Dorsey Hollins' journey into advocacy began with her own family's struggles with the educational system. When her oldest daughter, despite being well prepared for kindergarten, was misclassified to ease the teacher workload. Trinace discovered the school was rated F for academic achievement. This revelation, coupled with the challenges she faced advocating for her youngest daughter with unique needs, ignited her passion for systemic change. Transitioning from a corporate career to educational advocacy, Trinace now leads Parent Shield Fort Worth, a grassroots movement dedicated to ensuring every child in Fort Worth ISD receives a high-quality education. Parent Shield, under Trinace's leadership, is committed to addressing systemic inequities, particularly in marginalized communities, by meeting parents where they are and providing tools and resources to support their children's education. Let's welcome Trinace Dorsey Hollins. And re-elected in 2023 with 70% of the vote, Maddie Parker has served as the 45th mayor of Fort Worth, Texas since 2021. As mayor of one of the fastest growing cities in America, she keeps her focus on the basics of city government, championing investments in public safety and streets and infrastructure, maintenance and expansion. Mayor Parker leads dynamic efforts to improve Fort Worth for generations to come by enhancing community green spaces and parks, building the workforce of the future, and bolstering family-friendly business policies. During her tenure, Mayor Parker has seen Fort Worth named both the most pro-growth city in America and best large city in Texas for starting a business. Mayor Parker is a licensed attorney with more than 20 years of experience in national, state, and local public affairs. She was founding CEO of Fort Worth Cradle to Career and the Tarrant To and Through partnership known as T3. She graduated from the University of Texas at Austin with a Bachelor of Arts in Government, and just to even things out, has a law degree from Texas A&M University School of Law. So let's welcome Mayor Maddie Parker. And our distinguished moderator, Bob Ray Sanders. Journalism career spanned more than 4 decades in newspapers, television, and radio, and his work has been recognized with some of the nation's most prestigious awards. In 2015, he retired as associate editor and senior columnist from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, the newspaper where he began his professional career. He joined KERA-TV in 1972 as a reporter for the station's innovative newsroom program. Sanders later served as the vice president station manager for KERA and host and producer of the state's award-winning program, News Edition. He currently works as a director of communications. Thought you said you were retired, Bob. For Fort Worth Metropolitan Black Chamber of Commerce. Sanders is a graduate of North Texas State University. He is past president of the Press Club. Please welcome Mr. Bob Ray Sanders.
Thank you. People who are standing, we do have seats. If you guys want to take this moment to sit down, if you like. Let's get right to this. First of all, Kim, what I would like you to do is to react to what you just heard. Did anything surprise you? Did anything trouble you?
Nothing surprised me. One of the things I think that stood out to me was that a civil right is something designed to ensure that our children flourish. So that alone just justifies why definitely reading is a civil right. I don't think there's a question behind that.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I appreciate you telling your story from your family about what your parents did with you to make sure you had that quality education. I think it made me reflect on my own parents doing the same thing when I was right before I started kindergarten. made me think about choices I made as a parent. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Mia?
No, I don't think anything would surprise me. If you kind of get past the legalese and maybe the confusion of a presentation like that, at its foundation is think about the preamble to our Constitution, the pursuit of happiness and justice and all the things that our founding fathers wanted for this country. None of that is possible if you don't consider literacy as a civil right. And once you accept that, and I think many of you here, you probably agree with that principle, or you wouldn't be here at 7:00 on a Tuesday night. But once you establish that as foundational, then the real work begins, right? That's when you need to roll up your sleeves and work to make change.
Well, I am struck by the fact that there was a time in this country when it was against the law to teach certain people to read and write.
Mhm.
Now, we don't have slavery anymore, so we don't have that law. But when you look at this, when you hear what our professor just said, why is that? What got us here? Can you help me, Mary? I know you're dealing with this.
Well, I think at its core, we as a country have to accept or lean into what I think is fundamental, which is all students deserve access to a high quality education, and that traditional public education has to be at the center of that. There can be options for families, but in a state like Texas, in a city as fast growing as the city of Fort Worth, if you don't have high quality traditional public schools, you don't have a city. There is not enough volume in other forms of education to educate our students here in the city of Fort Worth. So that to me is fundamental. As to how we got here, I think you could spend a whole panel on that, of course. But I grew up in a really small town in Central Texas, and my grandfather was a high school principal. And I've talked about this a lot. And I remember when he passed away, there were hundreds of people that came back to his funeral just because he was their teacher. He was their educator. And we were a small district. There were no iPads in classrooms. It was just allowing teachers to teach and a certain level of fidelity in the classroom that I do think we've gotten away from. So maybe we'll work through those questions and answers tonight. But how do you return normalcy and just the basics to allow our educators, the professionals, to dictate what is best for students? And furthermore, give them the resources that they so desperately need and deserve, first and foremost. And then second is, how do you cultivate real leadership in education? We have it here in Fort Worth. There are phenomenal leaders in education, but at the same time, they're not systemic. We don't have systemic leadership at all levels. And it's especially problematic in our larger urban districts, not just in Fort Worth, but across the entire state of Texas. And so what are we going to do in the 8th largest economy in the world to keep up with all that success? You have to start with education. And back to Kimberly's remarks tonight, it all starts with literacy.
And for these, what do the parents you talk to say is a real problem and how we got here?
We actually have a fellowship class going on right now at the same time that I'm on the panel. And one of the things that our parents are saying is that, what's going on right now is nothing new. We're working against a system that was not designed for us to learn to read. It wasn't designed for us. So until we as a community come together and eliminate the low expectations that we have for students, specifically Black students, we're going to continue to see the results that we're seeing.
And Brent, you've studied this probably more than anybody in this room. I know you have other stats. Give us a few.
Yeah. This is we've been issuing these reports the last several years. This is some of it on the screen behind me. As Kimberly said, this is students all across the city and all the 12 different ISDs and the 12 or so different charter schools and charter systems. And so among all of those 170,000 children going to school in the city of Fort Worth right now in public schools, these are the numbers for those kids. So that's where the 43% reading at grade level. Of course, there are parts of the city where these numbers look quite different. The 4th ISD portion, which is more the central part of the city, it's 31% of students reading at grade level. The The Lake Worth ISD, which is the northwest part of the city and the county, 21%. So 21% of kids in school in Lake Worth are reading at grade level. And it's not just I'll say one more thing. There's a school in Fort Worth where 6% of the kids are reading at grade level.
That's my neighborhood.
There are multiple that are in the teens. It's not just I want to make the point too, it's not just what some people might call an inner city problem also. Like if you look at Eagle Mountain Saginaw ISD, it's actually only 40% of the kids in Eagle Mountain Saginaw are reading at grade level. If you look at Keller, 54% are reading at grade level. So even in Keller, almost half the kids in Keller are not reading at grade level. So it's something that goes across the system, but of course some are more disproportionately affected.
Why does Keller have people have the impression that Keller is a super student when half their kids can't read grade level?
Yeah. Well, some people paid a lot of money to buy a house there for that reason, so they certainly want to believe that it's high quality. I mean, I think you mentioned grades. I think that people get confused or misled by bringing home A's and B's on report cards, and they begin to believe that my kid's doing okay. They're not getting in trouble. They're on the honor roll. They must be doing okay. We live in Keller. We must be doing good. But it's not necessarily the case.
Yes, Professor.
I think, part of why we're here sort of goes back to what I was saying in the remarks, which is that we actually never have really committed as a nation to ensuring that all students get a high quality education. We just have never fully committed to it. And it's entirely possible for us to change that. Your community can decide, yes, every kid, not some of the kids, not only the affluent kids, not only the kids that live in a certain district, but all the kids are going to get a high quality education. And the generational benefits that would reap for you, not only in the short term, but in the long term, would be tremendous. But it is possible. One of the reasons I work on this issue is because change is possible when you decide to work on, when you decide to deliver a high quality education, it is possible. And I was sharing with some earlier that in my office, I have a picture of a segregated classroom from 1941. And the students in the classroom is an all Black classroom with a Black teacher. It's very rudimentary. Some of the kids don't even have shoes on. And I keep that picture up in my office now because those students can never imagine an end to segregation. They can never imagine Brown versus Board. It's 1941. But in the same way, the students who are in low quality schools really can't imagine what a high quality school is, but we can change that. Just like we put an end to legal segregation, we can put an end to low quality schools. It is entirely possible. We just have to have the determination and will and be willing to invest to make it happen.
Let me add something that I think is important, especially since Trinace is up here with us. And the name of our organization is Parent Shield for a reason. We can't do this without parents and caregivers, period. And you asked how we got here. I do think our degradation of the family is at the center of that as a country. It's not an excuse as to why we can't get better, but to partner with grassroots organizations like Trinace, who are in the trenches, talking with moms and dads and grandmothers and grandfathers and aunts and uncles, the people that are trying to check their homework and ask the questions. We have to do it in partnership. And I would argue, Bob, some of the most successful school districts and school systems in the country embrace that and come alongside families and parents to understand what those children and those families need to be successful. It's hard work. Trinace could tell us it's a whole nother conversation, right? But it has to be included in this conversation.
And yet we heard that there are parents who don't even know the status of their children. How can that be?
Report cards. These conversations are not being had with educators. The schools are not really having honest conversations with parents as to where their kids are. And then oftentimes the systems have failed the parents. So the parents are just trying to survive. They're just trying to make the best out of everything, not really having data that's able to be understood, transparent data. We're just not getting the information. So the only thing that we can rely on is the report cards, which take into consideration, did our child behave well? Were they on time for class? It's not taken into consideration, is our child reading on grade level at all? Those conversations are not being had.
We were wondering about this a couple of years ago. We were looking at this data and we were asking ourselves, why aren't people more upset about this? Like what, there should be rioting in the streets over this, but nobody seems to be upset at all. And we started kind of looking into this and we started thinking about the report cards, the A's and B's. So we did some surveys in Tarrant County last spring and we found this number, this 96% of Tarrant County parents believe their child is at grade level. And then we asked, does your child bring home mostly A's and B's on their report card? And 86% of parents said yes. So I think A's and B's is the new kind of participation trophy of academics.
I think that matches our report too, Brent. So when we had our freedom clinics that we did in July, we also brought parents and kids in. We assessed children to be able to tell parents exactly what reading levels their child was on, because again, this is not information that we're getting in the schools. We also surveyed parents to say, do you believe your child is on grade level and is reading on grade level? 75 to 80% of the parents that walked in there thought their children were on grade level, when in actuality, 63% of the children were not reading on grade level. So parents were shocked. They were scared.
Okay, Elders, let me remind you that we're going to take some of your questions too. There is a QR code, I think, right, Steve?
Right, and we have a bunch of questions already, so why don't we drop one in here? Great cue. And this first one's going to get directed to Professor Robinson, and I would note this question came in before you mentioned this case. So someone knows their legal work, and it's reference to the San Antonio case and how that adversely affects efforts to, and my app just got messed up on me here, but basically how will that adversely affect efforts going forward in Texas to try and prove this as a civil right?
So I want to just build off something Trinae said, and then I'll answer that question. So in terms of the lack of, parent information, I think this is something that's quite easy to fix. That's not an expensive fix to to be assessing kids on reading. And I do mean before third grade. You don't want to wait till then. You need to start in pre-K and K, and to let parents know. So that should be the first thing discussed at a parent meeting. That should be the first thing on the report card. You can keep the grades if you want, but really you need to know if children are on grade level on the key subjects. So that's a transparency issue that you don't need a lawsuit. You don't need a new statute. You don't need any of that to fix that. You can fix that right away this academic year. So I'm sure I'm not making friends with the school board right now. I'm just saying, I'm just putting out there, these are things that can be done. Second, to answer the question, the Rodriguez case. So what the Rodriguez case, why it's relevant is that it doesn't provide, the Supreme Court has basically said there is not a federal right to education. What they said is, we see that there's a significant need for improvement. And this was 1973. Right? But what they said is you have to look to your state to get relief for a right to education. And I can tell you, lawyers, including Rodriguez himself, did go and did win some litigation in Texas enforcing the right to an efficient education, which is guaranteed in the Texas Constitution. However, since those wins, the court also some of the litigation has been less successful lately. And the court has said, well, basically the state is doing a decent job and the court should not be telling them what to do. And so it doesn't seem like the environment, at least in the state courts, that there's an appetite to litigate these issues. But as I said, you don't have to litigate an issue to fix education. You can get, state government to pass laws, and you can actually enforce the laws that exist. You can get local government to establish ordinances and policies and requirements to say what we are going to deliver to our students. So you don't have to have a bunch of lawyers, not that I have anything against lawyers, I'm one, but you don't have to have a lot of them going to court to deliver and make literacy the right of every child in Fort Worth. You just have to have the determination to put in place the policies and practices that make it a reality.
You know, it seems to me that a lot of people play the blame game. They're educators who blame parents for not being involved enough in their kids' lives.
Yes.
People blame the administrator. People blame the board of directors, board of trustees. Is it everybody's fault?
I think so. I think it takes everybody. I think it takes everybody. Everybody has some ownership in this issue. Like I said, I appreciate the work that our teachers do. I feel like parents have a hard job too. The administrators have a hard job, but until we can all work together, keeping in mind that the kids are the North Star, we're not going to get anywhere. We're not going to get anywhere.
Well, just a minute though, we were in a meeting this morning, Professor, where somebody said, this was a mother of a child, who said, even at this great high school that we have here, she said, there are actually 2 schools in that school. There are kids, some kids are getting educated and others are not because of what classes they were in, what teachers they had. How does that happen in a city?
Well, I think in that situation specifically, it's low expectations, right? We've lowered our expectations for those kids. These kids, we're going to raise the bar, but those kids, they get this level of education, and that's unacceptable. And at the risk of making this sound very trivial in this very important conversation, I think we have to ask ourselves, it's a Jerry Maguire quote, show me the money. And you talked about this in your speech. What is the main thing we're focused on? If the main thing needs to be high quality education centered around literacy, are our investments in education, look in the mirror, are the investments in the city of Fort Worth really focused on the main thing? And I think collectively, we all have that responsibility. And if we would stop pointing fingers and look in the mirror and accept what level of responsibility do I have and what role should I be playing, then we can make a difference and we can do hard things. And I think that's the inspiration for this audience is, okay, let's get past the past. Let's get through what we've done wrong, and let's really focus on our North Star and move mountains. And I really, in my heart of hearts, believe that. To your point, that if the children are the North Star, if the adults can get out of the way and do what's best for kids, then all of this can fall in line. But we have to commit ourselves to that.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, President Bush nailed this years ago. It is the soft bigotry of low expectations. This is decades ago out of Texas. And so I think it's really important that we do have, high expectations and a high quality education for all students. And we certainly, we just accept, some kids are not going to be able to read. Unless they have a severe disability, all kids can learn to read. There's a very small percentage that cannot. And we're not educating all the children that can. It's just not happening.
And making sure that we also remove those people that have those perceptions that children with, the poor kids can't learn. If you have that mindset, you don't need to be in leadership.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I say this all the time. If you come into a classroom, and I address the new teachers coming to Fort Worth sometimes, you come into a classroom, coming to Fort Worth, and you say, because they live on this side of town, because they're this color, because they're in this economic group, they can't learn. You just fulfilled a prophecy because you won't teach them.
Yeah.
You've already decided they can't learn.
Barbara, I've got a question that really flows nicely out of what Mayor Parker was just talking about in terms of investment. It says, if literacy is the key to ensuring our community thrives in Fort Worth, how and what can the city do to grow partnerships with ISDs across the city to increase literacy rates? And maybe some others take the second parts of this question. What's been successful in larger cities elsewhere? What types of investments have been made?
Well, I think we're unique in Texas because not every state does this. There are some states where your cities are in control of your school boards and your school districts. That's not the case here. We have 12 school districts in the city of Fort Worth. I think at a foundation, I see Renee Faulkner here. Dr. Faulkner, the first time I met her she was standing in the middle of a hole in the ground outside of her school under construction because the city had failed to communicate our transportation public works department. She's like, I'm not leaving this hole because a bus is going to fall in it, right? That was leadership. She found my direct line, and that was the first time we met each other. She's Castleberry ISD superintendent. I digress.
Where is she?
Right here, pink. Yeah. Don't cross Renee. She's going to figure it out. Trust me. We got the pothole fixed, didn't we? Yes, we did. I think the city does need to examine this. Think about our community centers, our libraries, our after-school programming, how our parks, all of these things should be aligned with what students and families need. We have several different initiatives and programs that I'm very proud of, but I don't think we've gone far enough. And it's also not just to serve students, but it's to serve the entire family. Looking at the statistics that were behind us, this is not just this generation, it's multiple generations. And how should the city be really serving families differently? And we're going to work alongside philanthropy so that that's possible. Maybe we start with dyslexia, right? Maybe we start with other programs in our libraries that don't just make us feel good, but actually move the needle. And I think that's fundamental to this. And then I do think that the role I have chosen to play alongside community in the last few weeks is important. Believe me, the politically smart thing to do would be to bury my head and never talk about education, honestly. But that is not moral. It's not.
What made you do what you did?
Because I said this in a private meeting today. For years, we acted like junior high girls. We all talked behind each other's back. We all made whispers. But no one was willing to publicly say what we were all saying behind each other's backs. That's not maturity, and it's not leadership. So I had to look in the mirror and say, okay, what does it take to get the attention of our community and a rallying cry around that, right? And honestly, Bob Ray, my own kids, I've had 2 of my children within our school district. And for different reasons, I pulled them out. I have the resources to do that in my family. Most people in Fort Worth do not. And that's not acceptable. Just because you don't have the resources does not mean your child deserves any different than my kids. They're our kids. And it's a level of leadership and ownership that I will carry while I'm your mayor and well after being your mayor, because this is a long-term, decades-long commitment to make sure the city of Fort Worth has the finest education systems in the entire country. Quit talking about Texas. Let's talk about the United States. Set a gold standard, because I know this community can do that.
This is why we organized the data the way we did at the city level, which is kind of an odd way to do it because we have 12 different ISDs and we always have to explain what this means. But this is why, because we began to realize and to believe that this really is it's not a ISD issue. It's a city issue. It's a community issue. And so, I mean, I appreciate so much what Maddie has done just for that simple fact, like taking up that mantle of this is us. You know, this is a city issue that we've got to address. These aren't just test scores. We're talking a lot about test scores here. You know, sometimes a lot of us, we don't love the test, right? We know this. But the test shows to quite a degree what's going to happen. And so the state, I'm going to say this real briefly, but the state of Texas did this study where they looked at third graders who were below grade level in third grade, and then they tracked them over the next 15 years. And what they found when they looked at them 15 years later was that of those who were below grade level in third grade, less than 2% of those kids got a 2 or 4 year college degree, less than 2%. So in Fort Worth, there's 12,000 third graders right now in the city. About 8,000 of those, 2/3, are below grade level. So that means looking forward 15 years, of those 8,000, I was not a math major, religion and philosophy, but I think
Read that report.
I think that what that means is in 15 years, only about 150 of those 8,000 kids are going to get a 2 or 4 year degree. That's a city problem. It's a community problem.
Absolutely.
Bob Ray, this question takes things to the state level. It says, are we, or maybe I make it, should we consider changing state policies? This writer of the question mentions Alabama, which changed policies that led to dramatic increases compared to the rest of the United States. I might also mention Mississippi, which has done some things. And is that something we should be considering, or that has been successful elsewhere? Maybe Professor Robinson, you want to tackle that first?
Yeah, sure, I can tackle that. Yes, there are definitely things that the state can choose to do. So the state actually has already started to do some things. So it's requiring high quality instructional materials. So that is focused really, a lot of states right now, the big move in states across the country is focusing on the science of reading and sort of helping teachers understand that many teachers, unfortunately, were trained in methods that have been now disproven to work for literacy. And so because of that, you have to provide access to high quality materials and professional development for teachers, and to make sure that teachers in the schools of education are trained in the science of reading. So that is certainly happening in a number of states. And it's an entire continuum. So I'll just give you a brief sense of it. Like, it starts in the schools of education, making sure that literacy and those who are going to be teaching literacy understand the science behind how students learn to read. It's also making sure current teachers understand that. It's making sure that students are assessed and you develop an individual plan for that student when a student is below grade level. And then you have to provide a high quality intervention when students are not reading at grade level, for example. In addition, you have to empower parents to be able to act, to support their kids. So it's that transparency I talked about, giving them information at an early age, kindergarten, pre-K. Is my child on grade level? If not, what can I do about it? The other piece that we haven't talked about tonight is you have to really add adult literacy programs, because many parents didn't get a chance to learn to read. And so they're struggling they're not going to be able to help their parents. And look, that is something also, just like you can help K through, it's never too late to learn to read, but you do have to have the adult literacy programs to make it possible, to make it evenings, weekends, when people have space, online, in person, every possible way you can offer it, it needs to be available to provide those who can't read the chance to learn, sort of gain that key that they need to be the parent that their child needs. And I think I love the work Trinice is doing, because you're really educating and empowering parents. Parents have a lot of influence over how their child is doing. So I'll tell a funny story, which probably now that the teens and middle schoolers are not going to like me, I'm just going to tell it anyway. So in our house, we have a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old. And to earn their phones, to be able to use their phone each month, they have to read a book. Right? And we instituted this summer because I was at a sports match for one of our kids, and a parent said, yeah, my kids have to earn their phone. They have to read a book each month and tell me about it before they can use their phone. And I was like, what? I'm all over this. I was like, we're adding this in our house. And my kids were like, oh my gosh, what? Like, they were horrified, right? Horrified, which is why I was like, now I'm going to get probably spammed by a bunch of teenagers in Fort Worth. But my point is, they love that phone. They want access to it. Guess what? My husband and I love reading. So some say bribe, some say incentivize. I like incentivize. It sounds nicer. But the point is, we make sure that the kids are reading, because, that phone is really tempting them to spend their time in other ways. And so there has to be something that says, no, this is a priority. And so this is one of the things that our kids are doing now. And I can tell you the 16-year-old loves reading, so she's actually pretty psyched about it. But the 14-year-old is not happy. But she's doing it because, you know, she wants to keep access to the phone. And so, you know, I just throw that out there. It's like parents can incentivize their kids to do all kinds of things, right? Incentivize, not bribing, incentivizing kids to do what you want them to do. So.
Fantastic. And I would just say, one, thank you all. You are blowing up this app with questions. And I'm having trouble keeping up with them. We aren't going to be able to get to all of them, but I'm trying to just pick a good wide array of them. I'm going to combine two questions. The one from one person, what should be done? What should we be looking for in our next Fort Worth ISD superintendent? And then from another person, part of their question, what should be done to incentivize strong candidates from metropolitan cities that have made strong impacts on students of color and rural students to come here? And maybe Trinace, if you wouldn't mind taking the what should we be looking for?
Absolutely, I would love to take that one. So we've actually, as Parent Shields, members of Parent Shields, we've actually just inserted ourselves as the 10th trustee for Fort Worth ISD. So basically, there's a couple of things that we feel like the next trustee needs to be focused on, whoever comes in. One is academic performance, specifically for Black students. They're the only students that's regressing, so we want to see some intentional focus put on that. We want to see all of our children reading on or before grade level by third grade, on grade level, by third grade. We want parents to get transparent data. We don't want jargon, things that we're unable to understand. And we want the district and our philanthropy leaders to put some funding behind intervention. A lot of people talk about tier 1 intervention. If our children are 2 and 3 years behind and teachers are just focusing on tier 1, they're never going to catch up. So we're asking that the community, everybody that can hear my voice, like, we need our children to have intervention. That's how those gaps are going to be closed. We had an intervention program at the Boys and Girls Club for 3 months. In those 3 months, 97% of our children were able to grow at least 1 grade year in reading. If the schools have our children for 9 months, y'all do the math, they can grow. So that's what we would like to see our new superintendent put some focus on.
Okay, we're getting close down to time. Let's have another question from the audience, and then I want to come back to let you tell us where we go from here.
All right, last question here. And this is regarding how much of a role or what does the lack of special education funding and resources contribute to reading deficits? How much effort should be placed upon increasing federal, state special education funding as part of solving our current literacy problem?
Well, I'm by no means an expert in special education, but my brother-in-law has spent his entire life dedicated in special education. And I've spent a lot of time talking with him about this. And he would tell you, as a lifelong educator, the investments and priority and prioritization you have around special education actually reflects the success of your district at large. Because arguably, these are your most vulnerable students and families that deserve the right level of instruction and intervention, and importantly, removing low expectations.
Yes.
Certainly don't treat those kids any differently. What are the highest expectations? And I think that really does reflect a successful district, and we have some great examples here in the city of Fort Worth I think we can draw off of in particular.
I don't think I have the answer to the question, but I do know that there is a very high need in our city. Out of the parents that we work with, at least 85% of our parents, their children have unique needs. So putting some intentional focus behind that will definitely push this effort forward.
I've heard you talk in other settings about going with parents to help navigate the process.
Every day. I went to 2 art meetings with parents today. So the assistance is needed.
Okay, before I give you the last word, Commissioner Roy Brooks was here earlier, and he called me Bobby, by the way, because we went to school together. But he said, leave them with some Langston and with Langston News. And when I was thinking about parents in particular, you don't have to be an educated parent to want your child. In fact, one was not. Langston Hughes wrote a poem called Mother to Son, in which he puts the words in the mouth of this mother talking to her child, which could have been me. Well, son, I'll tell you, Life for me ain't been no crystal stair. No, it's had tacks in it and splitters and boards torn up and places with no carpet on the floor bare. But all the time I spent climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So boy, don't you turn back. Don't you sit down on the steps because you find it's kind of hard. And don't you fall now, because I still going, honey. I still climbing. And life for me ain't been no crystal stair. Beginning with you. I just want you to give us a word of hope, if there is any. But I can tell you right now, seeing this audience, the fact, as you said, that came out on a Tuesday night, I'm leaving with more hope than I came. So, Professor, you, and then I'll let you end it, man.
Sure. So I think the most hopeful thing that I can share is that, delivering a high quality education, having Fort Worth become one of the most literate cities in our nation is entirely possible. It's really simply developing the architecture to support delivering high quality education to the students. That is possible. There are a variety of, law, policy, and procedural levers that you want to put in place to make that happen. But it is within your grasp. And so I too am really energized by the crowd and the energy that I experienced in the city throughout today. And those who are in positions of influence who really want to change how education is delivered and how students are educated. And so I think that I think actually all of you are really the hope that we can focus on, is you can help to make this happen.
Jimmy.
My final thought would just be that our kids are capable. I too have hope, and just looking out at the audience. Don't let today be the last day that we see you guys. You of course you're sitting here today because you care about our kids' education. We have other meetings, school board meetings. Would love to see this crowd at the school board meetings too. Come and support our kids. They need everybody. I mean, if we can raise the expectations, we can really raise the efforts and the trajectory for our children, and it's going to take us all.
Yeah, I think the most hopeful thing to me is, as dark as these numbers are, there are exceptions. There are schools in our city right now that are high poverty that have very different kind of numbers than this. In fact, we mentioned the school that has 6% of kids at grade level. Probably 2 miles from that school, there's a school that has 66% of kids at grade level. Same demographics. Like if you look at the percentage of kids that are economically disadvantaged, it's the same. There's a 60-point differential between those schools. So there's a school, Days of Allah, Fort Worth ISD is doing it. There's some of the IDEA charter schools are doing it. Some of the Leadership Academy Network schools that are part of the Fort Worth ISD Texas Wesleyan partnership are doing it. There's a Castleberry school that's over 80% EcoDis. It's at a high level, kids at grade level. So there's the hope for me that there are these bright spots out there.
Okay, Mayor.
Well, Frank, you serve in elected politics today if you're not just slightly hopeful, because then you just be slightly crazy. Maybe I am, I don't know. I absolutely am hopeful. The question earlier about the superintendent of this school or any school, you need transformational leadership that are willing to be really bold in their decisions and focus on investments in classrooms. And I don't mean technology. I don't even mean buzzwords like curriculum. I mean, what do teachers need, especially master teachers need to be successful? And I think we're missing that. And I know we can get there. And I appreciate Dr. Sines repeating words I've said often, but I really mean this. This city can lift big rocks. And I've seen us do it since I've lived here for 18 years. So what is it going to take for us to make this the number one priority in the city of Fort Worth? Make the main thing the main thing. Think about your own family lives. If you don't focus on your family unit and that's not your priority, the whole thing falls apart. Nothing else in your life is going to work. If you don't make, for us, faith and family first and center point, none of this other stuff works. I think we've lost our focus in Fort Worth. And we need to return to focusing on literacy and education for all students, period. And that's how you keep hopeful, for sure.
Audience, join me in thanking our panel and our speakers. Thank you. Thank you. That does it for us. Please drive carefully home and be safe. Thank you, Council.